Most Americans believe the closest the United States ever came to nuclear war was the Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 days in October of 1962, when the world watched two superpowers stare each other down across the Caribbean. But less than 2 years before that crisis, something happened over North Carolina. Something quieter. Something almost forgotten. Something the public was never fully told. A U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber broke apart in the night sky, and as pieces of the aircraft fell toward the farmland below, 2 hydrogen bombs fell with it. One of them slammed into the ground and buried itself deep in the mud, but the other did something far more terrifying. Its parachute opened, its internal systems came alive, and step by step, it began preparing itself to detonate. Years later, investigators would uncover a fact so disturbing that it sounded almost impossible. Out of 4 safety mechanisms meant to stop an accidental nuclear explosion, 3 had failed. Only one final device remained. A small, low-voltage switch. Not a president. Not a general. Not a missile defense system. Just one switch. And if it had moved the wrong way, eastern North Carolina might have become the site of one of the worst disasters in American history. There would have been no warning, no evacuation, no time to understand what was happening, only a flash, and then silence. The date was January 23, 1961. At that moment, the Cold War had already changed the way America lived. Fear had become part of everyday life. Children practiced duck and cover drills in classrooms. Families built fallout shelters in their backyards. Politicians warned about missiles, communism, and the possibility of a war that could end civilization in a single afternoon. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a race that had no finish line. Every year brought new weapons, bigger bombs, aircraft, longer-range missiles. Each side believed that survival depended on being ready to strike back instantly, because in the nuclear age, the greatest fear was not just being attacked, it was being attacked first. If Soviet missiles destroyed American air bases before U.S. bombers could take off, America's ability to retaliate might collapse. And if that happened, the fragile balance preventing war could disappear. So, Strategic Air Command came up with a dangerous solution. Keep bombers in the air, always, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, across oceans, near enemy borders, above American cities and quiet farmland. These flights were part of a larger Cold War strategy that later became known as Operation Chrome Dome. The idea was simple. If nuclear war began, American bombers would not need to wait on runways. They would already be airborne, already loaded, already moving toward their targets. On paper, it looked like strength. In practice, it meant something terrifying. Nuclear weapons were no longer sitting only inside guarded bases. They were flying through the sky, hour after hour, night after night. And every one of those flights depended on machines continuing to work perfectly. But machines do not always work perfectly. Airplanes crash, metal breaks, weather changes, pilots get bad information. A loose part, a small leak, one missed warning light, can turn a routine mission into a disaster. And on the night of January 23, 1961, that is exactly what happened. A Boeing B-52 Stratofortress lifted off from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base near Goldsboro, North Carolina. The crew had done this before. To them, the mission was not historic. It was not unusual. It was another long Cold War patrol. Inside the aircraft were 8 crew members, trained airmen, professionals, men who understood the weight of what they carried. Behind them were 2 Mark 39 hydrogen bombs, each with a yield of several megatons, far more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, powerful enough to destroy entire communities in seconds. But on board the aircraft, everything began normally. The checklists were completed. The systems appeared stable. The bomber moved through the darkness above the Atlantic coast. Below, North Carolina slept. Families were in their homes. Children were in their beds. Farmers were preparing for another morning. No one on the ground had any reason to look up. Then another aircraft noticed something unusual. Fuel was leaking from the B-52's right wing. At first, it did not seem like a national emergency. It would happen. Crews were trained for problems. Pilots were taught to stay calm, manage the aircraft, and bring it home. But this leak was not small. It was growing. Fuel was pouring out into the freezing night air. Ground controllers ordered the crew to return to base. The B-52 turned back toward North Carolina. But by then, the problem was already becoming uncontrollable. Thousands of pounds of fuel were gone. Then tens of thousands. The aircraft was becoming unstable. Inside the cockpit, warning lights appeared. The crew tried to manage the crisis. They transferred fuel. They adjusted systems. They followed emergency procedures. But the leak kept getting worse. The bomber was losing balance, and every man on board knew what was behind them. 2 hydrogen bombs. No one needed to say it out loud. The B-52 began struggling to stay in the air. The pilots fought the controls. The aircraft no longer responded the way it should. Every decision mattered. Every second mattered. But the bomber was already dying. At around 10,000 feet, the stress became too much. A right wing failed. The aircraft rolled. Metal tore apart. Fuel scattered through the sky. The giant bomber began breaking into pieces over the fields of North Carolina. For the crew, there was almost no time. Some ejected. Some tried to escape. 5 men survived. 3 did not. But they were not the only things falling from the sky. As the B-52 came apart near the small community of Faro, North Carolina, the 2 hydrogen bombs separated from the aircraft. One bomb dropped without its parachute. It plunged straight down, hitting the ground with such force that it buried itself deep in the muddy farmland. The second bomb followed a different path, and that path is what turned an aircraft accident into something much closer to a nuclear nightmare. Its parachute deployed exactly as it was designed to do. At first, that might sound like a good thing. A parachute slows a bomb down. It prevents it from smashing into the ground at full speed. It gives a bomber time to escape before detonation during an actual wartime mission. But in this case, the parachute created a terrifying illusion. To the weapon's internal systems, the bomb was not falling from a broken aircraft. It was being released. It was behaving the way it was supposed to behave during war. As it drifted beneath the parachute, the bomb began following its own sequence. Internal power activated. Electrical circuits responded. Timers began to function. Arming systems moved through their steps. The weapon was not simply falling. It was waking up. And that was the part investigators would later find so disturbing. The bomb was not failing because it was broken. It was functioning because it believed it had been used. Above the dark fields of North Carolina, one of the most powerful weapons ever built was descending slowly beneath a parachute. Below it, people slept. No siren sounded. No emergency alerts were sent. No one was told to leave their homes. There was no public warning because there was no time, and almost no one understood what was happening. To the families below, it was just another winter night. But inside the weapon, a chain reaction of systems had already begun. The Mark 39 was designed with safety devices meant to prevent exactly this kind of accident. A nuclear bomb is not supposed to explode because a plane crashes. It is not supposed to detonate because wires short out, or parts break, or a parachute deploys by mistake. There are supposed to be barriers, layers of protection, mechanisms that stop an accident from becoming an apocalypse. But years later, declassified documents would reveal the terrifying truth. One by one, those barriers had failed. 3 of the 4 safety mechanisms did not stop the weapon from moving toward detonation. The bomb had passed through nearly every step it needed to pass through. Only one remained. A low-voltage switch, ordinary, almost forgettable, and somehow it stayed in the safe position. That was the difference. Not a grand decision, not a heroic last-second intervention, not a brilliant technological rescue. A switch stayed open, and because it stayed open, the bomb did not detonate. Had that final switch closed, the explosion could have been catastrophic. A multi-megaton nuclear blast would have dwarfed Hiroshima. The fireball could have consumed everything near the detonation point. Communities across eastern North Carolina could have been devastated. Shockwaves could have shattered buildings miles away. Radioactive fallout, depending on wind and weather, could have spread far beyond the crash site. And the most chilling part is that almost no one would have understood the danger until it was already too late. Not because America was at war, not because an enemy had attacked, not because a president had ordered a strike, but because a bomber leaked fuel, broke apart, and dropped a hydrogen bomb on its own country. When the wreckage hit the ground, the Air Force moved quickly. With the dead, the area was secured. Military personnel entered the farmland around Faro. Roads were closed. Recovery crews arrived. Helicopters flew overhead. Residents watched the sudden military presence with confusion and fear. They knew something serious had happened, but they did not know how serious. Officials described the disaster as an aircraft accident. They reassured the public. They controlled information. And for most Americans, the story ended there. A bomber crashed. Some crew members died. The weapons were recovered. The danger had passed. But behind closed doors, the true picture was much darker. Engineers began examining the recovered weapon components. Piece by piece, they reconstructed what had happened. They studied the parachute, the electrical systems, the damaged parts scattered across farmland. And the more they learned, the more uncomfortable the conclusion became. This was not a harmless accident involving inactive bombs. One of the weapons had come dangerously close to behaving exactly as intended. The second bomb created another problem. The one that had plunged into the ground without a parachute was buried deep beneath the earth. Recovery crews brought in heavy equipment. They dug through mud and water. They worked through unstable ground. They searched for missing pieces of the weapon. The deeper they went, the more dangerous the excavation became. Water filled the hole. The walls became unstable. The soil fought back. Eventually, crews recovered much of the bomb. But not all of it. Parts of that weapon remain underground to this day, buried beneath private farmland in North Carolina. The government later purchased a permanent easement over the site, restricting digging in the area. And so, beneath quiet land that looks ordinary from the road, pieces of a Cold War nuclear weapon still rest in the soil. Silent. Almost forgotten. But the buried remains were not what disturbed experts the most. What haunted them was the other bomb, the one that floated down beneath its parachute, the one that armed itself, the one that stopped only because a final switch did not move. For decades, much of the truth remained classified. Official statements minimized the danger. Reports were kept from public view. The American people were given only fragments of the story. Then, years later, researchers and journalists began digging through declassified records. One of them was investigative journalist Eric Schlosser, who studied America's nuclear weapons history while working on his book about nuclear accidents in command systems. In the documents he uncovered, one statement stood out. It came from Parker Jones, a nuclear weapons safety supervisor at Sandia National Laboratories. His conclusion was chilling. By the slightest margin of chance, a nuclear explosion had been avoided. That idea changed the entire meaning of the Goldsboro accident, because it suggested that America had not been saved by a perfect system. It had been saved by luck. And luck is not something anyone wants to depend on when the weapon involved can erase a city. The Goldsboro incident raised a question that was far bigger than one crash. If one accident had come this close, how many others had nearly happened? The answer was uncomfortable. The U.S. military had a term for serious accidents involving nuclear weapons. Broken arrows, lost weapons, damaged weapons, accidental releases. Incidents that were not nuclear war, but could still bring the world dangerously close to nuclear disaster. And Goldsboro was not alone. In 1958, a B-47 bomber collided with another aircraft during a training exercise near Savannah, Georgia. To keep the damaged aircraft from crashing, The crew jettisoned a nuclear bomb near Tybee Island. The bomb was never recovered. For decades, it has remained somewhere in the waters or mud off the Georgia coast. In 1966, another accident happened over Spain. A U.S. B-52 collided with a refueling tanker in the sky. 4 hydrogen bombs fell near the village of Palomares. 2 hit the ground and their conventional explosives detonated, spreading radioactive contamination across the countryside. 1 bomb fell into the Mediterranean Sea. It took a massive search operation to find it. Then, in 1968, a B-52 crashed near Thule Air Base in Greenland while carrying 4 hydrogen bombs. The crash and fire scattered radioactive material across ice and snow. Crews spent months cleaning the area in brutal Arctic conditions. Again, the world avoided a full nuclear catastrophe, but only after another chain of failures. These accidents revealed something the public rarely saw during the Cold War. Behind the image of perfect military control was a world of human error, mechanical weakness, and impossible pressure. Bombers had to fly. Crews had to perform. Weapons had to be ready. Systems had to respond instantly. But the more weapons a country builds, the more places they move, and the longer they remain on alert, the more chances there are for something to go wrong. And something did go wrong, again and again. In September of 1980, nearly 20 years after Goldsboro, a maintenance crew entered a Titan II missile silo in Arkansas. Job was routine. Deep underground sat a missile armed with a nuclear warhead far more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. During maintenance, a worker accidentally dropped a socket from a wrench. It fell down the silo and struck the missile. The impact punctured the fuel tank. At first, crews hoped the situation could be controlled. Emergency teams arrived. Commanders gathered. Hour after hour, fuel leaked and pressure built. Then, after midnight, the silo exploded. The blast threw the nuclear warhead hundreds of feet into the air. 1 airman was killed. Many others were injured. And once again, the warhead did not detonate. Once again, catastrophe stopped just short of the unimaginable. These stories sound impossible because the human mind wants nuclear weapons to exist in a world of perfect control. We want to believe that every danger has been calculated, every failure predicted, every safety system tested beyond doubt. But the history of nuclear weapons tells a more fragile story, a story where civilization sometimes balanced on small parts, tired crews, aging machines, bad weather, and decisions made under pressure. Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, one of the men who lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, later admitted something deeply unsettling. Humanity had survived the nuclear age partly because of skill and partly because of luck. Luck. It is a terrifying word in this context because luck runs out. The Goldsboro accident remains so disturbing because it did not involve an enemy attack. There was no Soviet missile, no battlefield, no declaration of war, no intentional launch. It was an ordinary military flight on an ordinary night. And that is what makes the story so hard to forget. Imagine the people sleeping below, a mother turning off a kitchen light, a farmer setting an alarm for sunrise, a child dreaming in a bedroom, a driver moving down a dark country road. None of them knew that above them, a bomber was tearing itself apart. None of them knew that 2 hydrogen bombs were falling from the sky. None of them knew that one of those bombs was moving through the steps of its own arming sequence. Their lives depended on a system they could not see, a weapon they had never touched, a switch they did not know existed. And when morning came, most Americans woke up as if history had not almost changed. They made breakfast. They went to work. They sent their children to school. The country continued, but beneath the surface, the truth remained. A fuel leak had nearly become a national catastrophe. A routine patrol had nearly turned into an American nuclear disaster. And one small switch had carried more weight than anyone would have believed. Today, Goldsboro is not remembered the way the Cuban Missile Crisis is remembered. There are no famous speeches attached to it, no dramatic televised address, No images of Soviet ships turning around. No moment where the world publicly understood how close it had come. Goldsboro was quieter, more secretive, more uncomfortable, because it was not a story about standing down an enemy. It was a story about almost destroying ourselves by accident. Somewhere near those fields in North Carolina, life continues. Cars pass along rural roads. Farmers work the land. Families live their lives. The landscape looks peaceful, normal, unremarkable. But beneath that quiet ground lies a reminder of how thin the line can be between ordinary life and unimaginable disaster. History often remembers the catastrophes that happen, the wars, the explosions, the days when everything changed. But some of the most frightening moments are the ones that did not happen. The moments hidden in classified files, the moments erased from public memory, the moments when the world came close enough to the edge to feel it, then somehow stepped back. Goldsboro was one of those moments. A bomber fell apart. A hydrogen bomb armed itself. 3 safety mechanisms failed, and millions of Americans never knew how close they had come. The world was not saved by a grand plan. It was not saved by perfect technology. It was not saved by human control over every possible failure. It was saved because one small switch stayed where it was. And sometimes that is the most terrifying truth of all, that history does not always survive because we are ready. Sometimes it survives because luck gives us one more day.